Hi, this is BigPapaGrump from the Board of Doom, and I'm going to be doing something a little bit different today. We're hoping to start this as a little bit of a series, 5 Things. So in the first edition of 5 Things, I'm going to list the 5 wrestlers that I loved growing up that kept me watching wrestling through my childhood and parts of my teenage years and then into my young adulthood. This list is going to go up to about the time that I stopped watching wrestling on a regular basis, which was right around the towards the end of the Ruthless Aggression era. And I'll go into that in a different video as to what was going on and what brought me back to wrestling. There was about a 2 or 3 year period where I didn't really watch as much as I used to. I would pretty much only watch the big 4, and then I would tune into Raw or SmackDown every once in a while to see what was going on, or if I heard something cool was going on from somebody at work or whatever, I would kind of watch for a little while and then I'd get back out of it because I wasn't as interested in the product. I wasn't as happy with the product at the time. This is a list of the 5 wrestlers I just could not get enough of that I would tune in to watch no matter what was going on up to about the Ruthless Aggression era. Number 1, from when I was a kid, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Anyways, being a fan of the smaller guys, as you'll see in this list, I just could not get enough of Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Loved everything about him. Loved everything about him. His moveset, his presentation, up until he came back as just being referred to as the Dragon. But his original run in WWF was one of my favorite runs of any wrestler. First time I ever saw Ricky Steamboat wrestle was WrestleMania 1, where he wrestled Matt Bourne, the future Doink the Clown. Inconsequential match at WrestleMania 1, but it showcased Steamboat. It was one of those moments where I was like, huh, this guy's pretty good. Never seen him. He had the kung fu moves in there, and then of course some of the high flying stuff, and he also was a really good grappler. He really could do it all. He could brawl if you really wanted him to. And subsequent feuds with Jake the Snake Roberts, Don Morocco, Hercules Hernandez at WrestleMania 2. Pretty much everything was leading up to his eventual feud with Randy Savage. And WrestleMania 3, the Steamboat Savage match, it's really not a controversial take to say that that is not only the best match of that night, but it's also my favorite Ricky Steamboat match during his WWF run. His Intercontinental Championship victory was great. His Intercontinental Championship run was less than great, eventually losing to the Honky Tonk Man before he eventually left WWE and resurfaced in WCW. Of course, his reemergence in WCW was still then NWA, I believe at the time, where he would eventually begin a World Championship run or feud with Ric Flair. His Chi-Town Rumble win over Ric Flair is considered one of the greatest championship matches of that time. Their feud at the time is considered one of the greatest feuds of that era. It's really no exaggeration or not really all that controversial to say that those are some great matches, but those were some great matches. Really showed off what Steamboat could do. Flair really brought the best out in him, and it was it was just a shame what happened afterwards, because he came back to WWE, WWF at the time, as the Dragon, and really never was able to recapture that momentum. But Ricky Steamboat will go down as one of my all-time favorite wrestlers. Now, shortly after WrestleMania, I began watching WWF regularly, and eventually also started watching World Championship Wrestling for the NWA on Saturdays. We'll get to some of that later. One of my favorite acts to watch on WWF were the British Bulldogs, specifically Dynamite Kid. Dynamite Kid was a guy who I just loved to watch wrestle. The technical ability, even as a face, he seemed to have a mean streak to him. He was a little guy, he was a stocky little guy, and he was like the quiet member of the two, because he would just go in there and just pound fists and all that good stuff. Dynamite Kid was great. I loved watching the British Bulldogs, and it's a shame because of what could have happened had he not hurt his back, and they were forced to lose the championship to the Hart Foundation due to his back. It was, they could have gone on and to great things, but Dynamite Kid will always be kind of, for me, for the prototype of the type of wrestler that I kind of root for, even, you know, subconsciously. I love watching little guys, and Dynamite Kid was great. The whole flying headbutts thing, just any headbutt, he would just do them left and right. He was a great he was a great technical wrestler. He was a great grappler, and he was one of the early tag team specialists that I was kind of drawn to, because I've always had a soft spot for tag teams. So it's you know, no surprise that the British Bulldogs are on my list, and specifically Dynamite Kid. Next wrestler on my list is Nikita Koloff. I started watching NWA wrestling right around, you know, the end of 1985, early 1986, and leading up to that summer, Nikita Koloff and Magnum TA began their best of 7 feud for the United States Championship. And I know, you know, I like Magnum TA just fine. I thought Magnum TA was great, but I found myself rooting for the bad guy. In fact, I found myself rooting for the bad guy just about every time he wrestled. It was strange. He was really the first heel that I actively rooted for, even before I was on board with Ric Flair. It was, in fact, I think it was the Nikita Koloff appreciation that led to me just not caring whether they're the good guy or the bad guy, just rooting. Because, you know, as a little kid, you're rooting for the good guys, you're rooting against the bad guys. But as I started to watch more NWA wrestling, and I started to appreciate the wrestling as an art form as opposed to the show that was WWF, which still had some great wrestling in it, but they were more about the glitz and the glam as opposed to NWA wrestling. And, you know, whenever I could catch AWA or World Class Wrestling, later on UWF, they were more about the art of the wrestling. And Nikita Koloff was one of the guys I was like, this guy's awesome. It was really, I have to give props to my friend Big Shez. Shout out. I'll put your Twitter handle on there again, because he was the one that told me, oh, you like WWF wrestling, you got to check this out. And, you know, we had Superstation TBS, so I could get it on the TV. And it was really watching Nikita Koloff. You know, he was one of the big guys, but he wasn't super big. You know, he was strong, he was intimidating, he played his villain role well, and he was just really good combination of grappling and powerhouse that I just learned to appreciate. His feud with Magnum TA was brilliant. It was unfortunate because they gave him a face turn and let him grow his hair back in, and he was never quite the same after that. But even with him and Dusty winning the Crockett Cup with Magnum TA at ringside, just a great moment. And Nikita Koloff was one of the guys that really kept me watching NWA wrestling, and kind of helped introduce me to, you know, from wanting to see him and Magnum TA wrestle, it introduced me to the Road Warriors and Dusty Rhodes and the Four Horsemen and everybody else from there. And I continued to watch WCW later on as well, clear up to a certain point that, you know, pretty much everybody. I'll make a separate video as to when I officially wrote off WCW. I'll give you 2 words: David Arquette. Next wrestler on my list, we're going to have to fast forward to the Attitude Era. I had, due to life and youth and things like that, I wasn't watching wrestling as regular, but I was still keeping an eye on it. Then I really started to get back into it hardcore right around the Attitude Era. I mean, I was still watching, but, you know, I started watching on a regular basis, and that was to see The Rock. I am unabashedly a diehard Rock fan, always have been. I kind of started watching again while he was still a heel, and thought he was funny as hell. His match against Mankind in the abandoned arena was just stupidly entertaining. You can say what you want about how he was, you know, all about catchphrases, but the guy was funny. The guy had his catchphrases, but he was also very good and very witty on the fly. You can say what you want about, you know, his in-ring ability, but one of the things is that he was underrated as a ring worker. He did have an expanded moveset. He couldn't pull off all of them the way you wanted to, but he knew how to. He would try different moves all the time. I will say one thing: he has the worst sharpshooter in professional wrestling history. But that being said, you know, his feud with Stone Cold, his feud with Triple H, his feud with The Undertaker, the moment he ended Billy Gunn's career. We all know that moment. Some of the greatest promos ever. When Chris Jericho debuted, they had him debut against The Rawk because they knew that it was going to be a star-making moment for Jericho, and it was. And, you know, his feud with Hogan at WrestleMania 18, where, you know, you had that moment. You know, I was just absolutely devastated when The Undertaker came down and during the Iron Man match against Triple H, where he lost the title back to Triple H due to The Undertaker's interference, and I was just like, that's just stupid. Why did they not give the belt to The Rock? His heel run at the end of the main part of his career was a little bit on the downside, but you cannot, you know, you can't deny the contribution that Dwayne Johnson made to the WWF and later WWE. And every time he comes back, you know, I get goosebumps every time I watch on YouTube when he came back and they announced him as the host of WrestleMania, where Cena and The Miz wrestled. I think it was like 27, and I was the only Monday Night Raw I've ever attended was the night that it was me, the Wife of Doom, and Big Shez, and we were there the night The Rock came back to Philadelphia for the during the Invasion angle, and that place was just electric. And that's what The Rock did. He made the place electric. He was fun to watch. He was fun to listen to. And that's why he's on my list. The last one on my list is also the hardest one to talk about. And it's for a variety of reasons. And when I mention that it's Chris Benoit, everybody understands immediately why. First of all, I'd like to say that, you know, I'm not going to get into, you know, everything that surrounded his death. I was originally going to do a list, and I still might, of 5 reasons why I love Chris Benoit. And I was going to address that quite a bit in the video. But during his career, Chris Benoit's the guy I loved watching the most. Above The Rock, above The Undertaker, above Benoit, above Guerrero. It was just a combination of, he reminded me of the Dynamite Kid, which is, you know, a lot of people have said about him. And he was just fun to, again, another combination of mat specialist, brawler. He could do the high flyer stuff. And, you know, he didn't cut the greatest promos, but that's okay because I didn't want to hear him talk. I wanted to see him beat people up, and that's what he did. I understand that, you know, his moveset took, just like with Dynamite Kid, his moveset took his toll on his body, as it does with a lot of wrestlers. But Benoit was great. I started watching Benoit when he was in WCW. Kept wondering, why don't they give this guy a push? Every time they give him a push, they take the push away. I don't know what kind of backstage politics were going around, but he finally got fed up, came to WWF, and he got the push he wanted. He was he won his championships. He won all the championships, I'm pretty sure. And he was just, for me, I would always know. He could have been wrestling. He could have been it could have been a jobber match, and I would stop and watch Benoit. To this day, whenever I do the video games, my submission move is still the crossface. And the reason for that is because of Chris Benoit. I'm not going to excuse what he did. All right, I'm talking up until, you know, June 20th, 2007, as opposed to all the way up to June 24th, 2007. Because up to that point, you know, Chris Benoit was a guy I loved watching. And his, you know, he had his feel-good WrestleMania moment with him and Guerrero when they both won their championships. And it was just fascinating to watch him in the ring. You know, I really wanted to wrap up my spiel about Chris Benoit, but there's really no way to wrap it up without addressing the tragedy that befell his wife and his child. And I'm just going to leave it at that. I'll leave that for another video. So those are my 5 all-time favorite wrestlers. I could easily have put The Undertaker, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, Ric Flair, Kurt Angle, Eddie Guerrero. I could have easily have put them on this list, but I wanted to go to the ones that not necessarily were the best at all times, but ones that I enjoyed watching. I'm going to do a different video in a few days about the current wrestlers that I love, and if you've been watching any of these videos and seen some of my t-shirt collection, you can guess a couple of them. and they're of course based on what I've seen since they came to WWE or NXT. So for now, I'm going to leave it at that. I've been Big Papa Grump. This has been the Board of Doom. See you later.